You don't have any allies in this house. Don't rely on my son or me anymore. Go do your own shopping. Must be nice sitting in that wheelchair, huh? With those words, my husband and Jane left, leaving me alone in my wheelchair. I lost my right leg because of a driving mistake by my mother-in-law, Jane. Yet suddenly, my husband betrayed me while I was engulfed in sorrow. I'm home? Huh. Where is everyone? Jim, who had just returned from an overseas assignment, offered me a helping hand. I'm Mary, a 28-year-old office worker. I married Tom, my husband, 3 years ago through a mutual acquaintance. Initially, I thought Tom, who seemed timid and gentle, was unreliable. But as we went on multiple dates, I gradually became attracted to his subtle kindness. Tom works busily every day at the advertising company run by Jim, poised to be the next president. I was supposed to help out at Jim's company after getting married. Being a web designer at my current company, I thought I could be of use. But Jim kindly smiled and said, If you're satisfied with your current job, keep working there. Don't overexert yourself for me or Tom. I feel fulfilled at the company I've wanted to join since my student days. Jim noticed this and was considerate of my feelings. The current president is my father, so as long as he's fine with it, I have no objections, said Tom, never complaining to me. But Jane was the only one dissatisfied with me working at another company. She believed my company was a rival to Jim's. Jane, who had always been a housewife with no work experience, seemed to think that a company in the same industry was the enemy. It's unthinkable for you to become an enemy of Tom and Jim. You're not fit to be a daughter-in-law, she would say, never understanding my explanations. In reality, Jim's company was so large that my company was nowhere near a competitor. I had recently given up on getting through to Jane, who never seemed to listen. I only meet Jim and Jane during Christmas or summer vacations, and Jane's attitude wasn't causing me too much stress. Tom was as kind as ever, and I was living a peaceful life. But then, one day, an event changed my fate drastically. I was driving home from work as usual. Suddenly I spotted Jane crossing the street a few meters ahead, struggling with heavy shopping bags. Jane, are you shopping? I can give you a ride home if you like. Seeing the road was quiet, I pulled over and called out to her. Jane noticed me and got into the car, saying, Oh, thank you. But about 5 minutes into the drive, Jane started complaining from the passenger seat. Can't you drive a bit faster? We'll never get home at this pace. I was driving slower than usual because of the narrow streets, but Jane seemed irritated by this. And as soon as we hit the main road, Jane's anger exploded. Let me drive. I'm way better at this, she yelled, grabbing my hand from the steering wheel and violently turning it. What are you doing? It's dangerous. I tried to stop her, but Jane kept controlling the wheel. Then, as our car veered into the oncoming lane, a large truck loomed ahead. Danger! In the next moment, a loud crash enveloped everything and darkness fell. When I woke up, I saw a white ceiling and realized I was in a hospital. At the same time, I noticed my right leg was gone. What? My right leg? Confused and overwhelmed, the doctor explained to me in a calm voice. Your leg was severely damaged with excessive bleeding, so we had to amputate. Fortunately, your life was saved, but you'll need to stay in the hospital and undergo rehabilitation for a while. Hearing the doctor's words, I was stunned. Amputated right leg? Does this mean I'll have to live in a wheelchair from now on? What about my job and household chores? My mind was a jumble, and I couldn't think straight. Fortunately, it seems Jane only suffered a fracture and would be discharged soon. Tom, who rushed to the hospital after hearing about my accident, was crying beside me. Mary, are you okay? I'm so sorry about Mom. Seeing Tom crying with guilt, I couldn't bring myself to cry. I thought showing my sadness would only make Tom blame himself more. It's okay. My job is mostly done sitting down, and I'm sure I'll manage the household chores somehow. I tried to be as brave as possible to encourage Tom. Tom apologized to me over and over, promising, "I'll support you for the rest of my life." Later on, my in-laws came to the hospital and apologized deeply. "I'm so sorry about what Jane did." I shook my head at my in-laws. "No, it's also my fault for not reacting quickly enough." Even Jane, who had always been harsh to me, looked genuinely sorry this time. "If Mary is okay with it, how about living with us? At least until you get used to wheelchair life. Let us help in some way." Contemplating Jim's words, I wondered if it was okay to live with Jane, who wasn't very fond of me. As I was lost in thought, Tom, who was listening next to Jim and Jane, spoke up. "Mary, this is their way of making amends. Everyone wants to support you, even in a small way." Indeed, adapting to life in a wheelchair would be challenging. And if accepting their offer would lighten Jim and Jane's hearts a bit. All right, I may cause some trouble, but thank you for having me. So I accepted the offer to live with Jim and Jane. 6 months into our cohabitation, I had grown quite accustomed to life in a wheelchair. Jane, who I was worried about, had become kind to me, a complete change from before the accident. When Jim and Tom were not home, Jane would look after me. She didn't just help with my wheelchair-bound life, she took me shopping and out for walks. Jane supported me every day. I had my doubts about living with Jim and Jane, but now I'm just grateful. I'm truly thankful for being supported by those around me every day. However, I later realized that this peace was just a facade. "I have to go on a 3-month overseas assignment. The house will be empty, but feel free to contact me anytime if you need anything." It was sudden when Jim said that. Apparently, the head of the overseas branch fell ill, and Jim, being the president, had to step in. "I'll be leaving the company and the house in your hands while I'm away. Take care, Tom." With that, Jim hurriedly left for his trip. It was lonely without kind Jim around. But having grown to trust Jane completely, I wasn't particularly worried. The day after Jim left on his trip, I woke up as usual in the morning and headed to the washroom to wash my face. My face wash is on the top shelf. Usually my face wash is placed on a lower shelf so I can reach it from my wheelchair. But today it was on the very top shelf of the washroom. Maybe Jane moved it while cleaning the washroom. I wheeled myself to the living room where Jane was. "Jane, sorry to bother you, but I can't reach my face wash. Could you get it for me?" When I asked, Jane let out a big sigh. "Don't think you can use me forever. Why don't you do it yourself for a change?" I couldn't believe what I heard from Jane. "I'm sorry. I wish I could get it myself, but it wasn't in its usual place." When I said that, Jane's face twisted with obvious annoyance. "Listen, I was nice to you only because Jim was here. But I don't recognize you as part of this family. It's your own fault for being a terrible driver, right? That's why you lost your leg. We have no reason to take care of you." "Jane, what's gotten into you all of a sudden?" I was in shock, unable to believe Jane's words. "Sudden? Don't be mistaken. I've never trusted you. You should be grateful to Jim's company, but instead you work for a rival. You're a traitor." "That's not true. I've said so many times. The company I work for is not even close to competing with Jim's company." As I desperately denied it, Jane glared at me fiercely. "Quiet. I can't believe Jim protects someone like you. Anyway, with Jim gone, you have no allies in this house. You're too dependent on Tom." Yelling that, Jane grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house. I could only sit in shock, staring at the empty sofa where Jane had been. I couldn't believe the sudden change in Jane, who had been so kind until now. Jane didn't come back home even late into the night. I feel sick being around you, so I'm staying at a friend's house tonight. She messaged me, and then I couldn't reach her after that. Feeling confused and restless, I couldn't sleep and stayed up in the living room. Around 1 a.m., when Tom returned from work, I told him about Jane. Tom looked at me skeptically and glared. Well, Mom's not entirely wrong, Mary. You're having her take you shopping and for walks, right? Must be nice to have everything done for you because you're in a wheelchair. Can't you do your own shopping? Dad has always shielded you, but you've taken advantage of that. I was speechless. Even Tom is saying this. I never expected Tom to speak to me that way, and I couldn't say anything. I'm feeling sick too, so I'll stay at a friend's for a while. Learn how hard it is to live by yourself. Tom left the house with those harsh words. I was simply stunned by the sudden change in both of them. Jane and Tom didn't return home for a week. No matter how many times I tried to contact them, there was no response. Luckily, there was plenty of food in the fridge, so I wasn't short of things to eat. But living alone was extremely difficult, and even daily tasks like bathing and using the toilet were a struggle. A week passed, and I was physically and mentally exhausted. Was it all my fault for depending too much on Jane and Tom? I shook my head every time I thought that. I always tried to do things on my own and helped with housework as much as I could. Indeed, I needed help when going out, but my outings were only for necessary shopping. I never made unreasonable requests. And Tom had said living with me was his way of making amends. It seemed strange for him to change his mind so suddenly. It's hard to believe Tom was originally against living together. The more I thought about it, the more unnatural Tom's abrupt change seemed. But without the ability to go out on my own, I was at a loss. In this helpless situation one day, I'm home. Oh, is nobody here? The first person to return home was surprisingly Jim. Jim, why are you here? Weren't you on a 3-month assignment overseas? As I expressed my surprise, Jim smiled calmly. Well, that was the plan, but the vice president said, I'll watch over the future president during this crucial time, and took over my assignment. I did stay overseas for a week to check on things, but where are the other two? Today's a holiday, so Tom should be off, right? Really? Well, Jane and Tom, I hesitated, not knowing how to respond. I came back much earlier than planned, so I contacted Jane and Tom, but I couldn't get a hold of either of them. I was worried something might have happened. Jim can't contact them either. Maybe they turned off their mobile phones. Seeing me deep in thought, Jim looked worried. What happened? The house is messier than usual. And Mary, you look terrible. If those two had been responsible, this wouldn't have happened. Did they do something to you? Jim said this and knelt down to be at eye level with me. I began to tell him slowly, with a serious expression. Actually, a week ago, Tom and Jane said, You're too dependent on others. Learn how hard it is to live alone. And they left. They seem to be staying at their friends' houses now. Hearing this, Jim's expression turned to ice. A week? You can't go shopping alone, can you? Were you okay with meals? It's okay. I had just gone shopping, so I managed for about a week, I said, and Jim looked somewhat relieved, but then his expression hardened again. What have they done? I need to find them and confront them right away. I tried to calm the shaking Jim. Wait, please. There's something strange I've noticed. Jim raised his eyebrows at my words. Strange? What do you mean, Mary? It might sound rude. Jane never really liked me and probably didn't want to live with me. But I can't believe Tom would feel the same. After the accident, he was so upset. Can his thoughts really change 180 degrees in just a few months? I said, and Jim rested his chin in his hand, deep in thought.
True. Tom was quite shocked. He didn't sound like he was lying when he said he would support you. And it's odd for the timid Tom to talk so harshly.
Jim said, tilting his head, and I looked at him directly. That's what I thought. Maybe Tom has a reason he must follow Jane. Jim's face suddenly lit up.
That's possible. Jane is strong-willed, and Tom has always been too scared to go against her. Let's look into it.
Saying this, Jim began making a phone call. The person on the phone is a detective agency. He immediately made a request to find out where Jane and Tom were.
Mom wouldn't have friends to stay with for so long. It's worth looking into. I can meet Tom at the company, but let's find out where he is. This might be related to the current situation.
So Jim and I waited for the investigation results from the detective agency. 2 weeks passed and Tom and Jane still hadn't returned home, and their phones remained unreachable. If Jim hadn't returned when he did, I would have been in serious trouble. While I was thinking this, the detective agency sent their findings. Jim, holding a thick envelope, came to my room.
Mary, look at this.
What was inside was shocking. 3 days later, I came to a certain place to confront Tom and Jane. It was Jim's company. Jim had arranged for a helper, so I could come here without his accompaniment. As I entered the company, an employee greeted me at the entrance. The president has informed us. Please, this way to his office. They led me in my wheelchair to the president's office. As I entered, Jim was sitting on the sofa, facing Jane and Tom.
Mary.
Tom was the first to speak, looking awkwardly at me.
Oh, Mary, you're still alive. Too bad. It seems Jim is on our side. You have no allies, do you?
Jane said this, laughing as if pleased. Jim is on your side? Why do you think that? I asked with a cool gaze.
Do you know why we were all gathered here today? Jim said, there's someone unnecessary in our family. Finally, Jim has realized that Mary is our enemy.
Jane said with a sly smile, but I remained silent. Jim, sitting on the sofa, also stayed quiet.
That's not true. I don't think Mary is unnecessary.
Tom spoke in a low voice, but Jane glared at him fiercely.
Tom, you understand, right? You're on your mother's side, aren't you?
Overpowered by her presence, Tom shut his mouth and looked down. Such a pathetic sight. I was utterly disgusted watching Tom. Then suddenly,
What are you two misunderstanding?
Jim said with an incredibly low voice.
Misunderstanding? What do you mean?
Jane asked, puzzled, and Jim glared at her coldly.
The unnecessary ones in our family are you two.
Jane and Tom were stunned, unable to believe Jim's words.
Wait, you two means not me and Tom, right? That's right. Who else would it be?
Jane chuckled nervously, but Jim spoke clearly.
You're joking, right? Why would we be unnecessary?
Jane stood up anxiously. Tom, sitting next to Jim, was pale.
The reason? You two should know it best. Isn't that right, Tom?
Jim's words made Tom shiver.
Before I left on my trip, I told you, didn't I? I'm entrusting you with both the house and the company. And what did you do? You abandoned both. You've been embezzling company money, haven't you?
Tom's hands trembled upon hearing Jim's words.
How did you know that? I had instructed my subordinates strictly not to tell. I used a detective agency. They found the fraud, and when I asked your subordinates, the evidence was overwhelming. It's shameful as a father.
Jim sighed deeply.
Jane found out and blackmailed you, right? Let me guess. She made you harass Mary in exchange for keeping quiet.
Tom's eyes filled with tears as he looked down.
But Mom said I had no choice. I didn't want to do that to Mary, but... Be quiet,
Jim yelled at Tom, who was making excuses like a child. The intensity of his voice silenced the room.
So you betrayed Mary for such a trivial reason. You hurt a woman who tried to protect you even after losing her leg.
Tears welled up in my eyes at Jim's words. It was like a tension inside me had finally been released.
Tom, you're fired, and you'll repay every cent you embezzled.
Then Jane interjected. Wait, it was just a moment of confusion. Tom is young. These things happen. Isn't it a parent's job to forgive a little mistake? Right, Tom? Jane said, gently patting Tom's back.
I'm talking as a boss to an employee, not as a father to a son. I can't overlook an employee embezzling company funds.
Jim's cold response left Jane speechless. Jim then intensified his tone towards Jane.
And you, I already know everything. You'll pay the compensation in full.
Huh? Jane was dumbfounded by Jim's words.
I said I used a detective agency. I know who you've been with these past 2 weeks. It's the man you met at a dinner party I attended, right? The affair has been going on for a year now, hasn't it?
As Jim spoke, Jane's face turned ashen.
An affair? Mom? What are you talking about?
Tom seemed shocked, unaware of Jane's affair. But Jim, you were always busy with work since we were young and never paid attention to me. I endured for years, and you can't forgive just 1 year of an affair? Jane defiantly said this, covering her face with her hands.
I do feel bad about that. But you know, I always tried to spend weekends with the family. And I was about to hand over the company to Tom, so we could relax in our old age. I had planned to take you to various places, and yet...
Wait, Jim, I was wrong. Please forgive me. Just not a divorce. Jane clung to Jim, her face wet with tears. But Jim looked at her expressionlessly.
No, it's too late. The affair is bad enough. But you disregarded Mary, leaving her alone in a wheelchair for weeks. Could have been life-threatening. I can't stay with someone capable of doing that so casually.
You're lying. I can't believe something like this is happening. It's not supposed to be like this. Jane mumbled incoherently, her eyes empty. Then Tom suddenly stood up and approached me.
Mary, you'll forgive me, right? I never wanted to hurt you. Besides, you can't live alone if you divorce me, right?
I felt only disgust towards Tom clinging to me. It's impossible. You might betray me again for your own sake. I can't trust you anymore. Besides, I'm going to work for Jim's company. They have a barrier-free employee dormitory, and I'll live there. Tom, please divorce me. At my words, Tom collapsed on the spot.
No, please forgive me.
I said nothing more, watching Tom's face crumple in tears. The president's office was filled only with the pitiful cries of Jane and Tom. Later, my divorce from Tom was finalized. He resisted until the end, but the embezzlement and leaving me alone made divorce inevitable. Moreover, abandoning me, a person with a disability, was seen as neglect, so Tom and Jane had to pay me compensation. Jane was initially loud, protesting, "Why should I pay Mary?" But she quieted down after the lawyer told her,
"Just be glad you weren't arrested."
With Tom's debt to the company and Jane's compensation for the affair, they owed a huge amount. Now they're working from morning till night, burdened with debt. But Jane, who never worked, and Tom, tarnished by embezzlement rumors, couldn't find well-paying jobs. I heard they're living in an old apartment, constantly blaming each other for their situation. Meanwhile, I started working as a web designer at Jim's company. Jim used all of Jane's compensation for the affair to remodel my apartment and the employee dormitory to be barrier-free.
This might not fully make up for what Jane and Tom did, but it's at least something,
Jim said, ensuring my comfort. It seems that even after the divorce, my relationship with Jim is like that of a real parent and child. Now, I plan to enjoy my life more for myself